Hello everyone. So in this segment we are going to see ER diagram. So we are going to start a new chapter. This chapter is about overview of database design process. So this is chapter 7 from the textbook 6th edition. All right, and I believe in 7th edition this is chapter 3. So this is about data modeling using entity relationship diagram. So in this chapter, we are going to talk about the overview of database design process. Okay. As an example, we are going to see company database. So far we are seeing actually the same database as our discussion about basic SQL and relational model also. So the same database we are going to see as an example in our database design process. So in the ER model concept, we are going to talk about entity and attribute, entity type, value set, key attributes, and everything that is going to construct the ER model. We'll talk about ER model notation, some naming convention, and some design issue. Okay. So finally, we are going to see the step-by-step process, how to draw the ER diagram for company schema. As an example, we are going to see use company schema, company database schema, but we will actually go over all the step-by-step process, how to generate an ER diagram for a database design. As an alternative notation, we are going to see a couple of other notation also, and we will see NRE relationship where n greater than 2. All right, now let's talk about what is the database design process. So in database design process, we have actually in any kind of database application or in any kind of application that has a backend database, there are actually two steps. We have a database schema design and we have to design an application program. So in this chapter, we are going to focus in the chapter on database schema design. So given the database requirement, how we can design the conceptual schema for a database. Now the application program design generally focuses on the program and interfaces that will access and update the database. Okay, but that is actually for the front end user. So that is for front end user, giving the interface to the user so that they can use the application. All right, but this chapter mainly focus on the database schema design. All right, so here the input is the database requirement and we are going to see how to design a conceptual schema for a database. All right, so we are going to just get few steps back. So what actually we are doing so far in chapter 4 and 5 and chapter 3. So in chapter 3 we saw what is a relational model. Okay, so what is a relational model, and in the chapter 4 and 5, when we are already familiar with the relational model, we used an existing database. All right, so we saw that given a relational schema, how we can use this relational schema and how we can retrieve query using SQL. But the relational schema means the whole database was in front of us. Okay, I mean we already know about the database design. All right, so in the database design includes all the description, the catalog of the database means how many tables are there, which are the tables, what are the attributes in this table. The whole database schema was in front of us. And when we have the database schema, then we can use it for SQL and we can use it also to develop an application program that can communicate with this database schema. Okay, but now we're going to actually take few steps. Now we're going to actually see how did we get this database schema. Okay, means this is actually our database design. But how did we get this database design? Okay, how do we know that how many tables you are going to have, what are going to be the tables, and what are going to be their constraints. Okay, how we are going to get this design. So in this chapter we are going to focus on that. So the initial input for getting a database design is a database requirement. All right, say some company is going to create a database for their some company is going to create a database for them. Okay, so obviously initially they will have a initial database requirement. All right, so the initial database requirement, it could be just a some requirement in plain English word. Okay, so exactly what they want in your database. All right, say for example, say we're going to see a couple of example what is initial database requirement look like. Now for example, say in our company database that we are seeing so far, in our company database they keep track of some employee, keep track of some department, some project. Okay, and which employee works on which department and which project. All right, so given this database requirement, and this requirement is simply in plain English requirement. Okay, written in plain English word. So from the database requirement, we are going to generate a conceptual schema. Okay, we are going to generate a conceptual schema. A conceptual schema is nothing just a high level schema of database design, a high level design for a database. Okay, so this conceptual schema is going to give you a high level idea how our database will look like. And one of the format of conceptual schema is ER diagram. Here E stands for entity and R stands for relationship. All right, so so from that plain English word requirement, first we are going to generate a conceptual schema. That is, one form of conceptual schema is ER diagram. Then from that ER diagram we can, from that conceptual schema we can generate our relational schema. Okay, so this relational schema that we have used already, so our company database, the whole list of tables, their attributes and their constraint. Okay, all right, so one simplified this simplified diagram is going to illustrate the whole database design process. So first we are going to start with a mini world, for example like a system. So let's say in our if we think about our University of Colorado. Okay, so like UC Denver as a mini world. So it's a system where actually we have couple of entities. For example, we're going to keep track of course, we're going to keep track of faculties, instructor, students. All right, each course has section and the courses are related with the instructor. So the whole system is like a mini world. Now if we think about our company database, a company database is like a mini world where we have employee, we have department. Now employee works in department, now they are related with each other. Okay, so that's how a mini world is nothing just a system. All right, system where this is a set of entities or object and each of the objects are interacting with each other. Now the whole database system design will start from this mini world. Okay, now let's say you want to generate a database design, you want to generate a database for your mini world. Okay, so you are thinking that for your company or for your university, like whatever the mini world is, you want to have a system or application. So you want to have a backend database and you want to have a front-end application. Okay, all right, so first you have to find out the requirement. Okay, so the first step is that requirement collection and analysis. That means in your system what should be the requirement. For example, how our we have a software UCD access, how our UCD access is going to work. So the student should be able to enroll a course. Okay, So we have student and we have course. So student should be able to enroll a course. All right, so the courses will be assigned to the instructor, like that. So this requirement based on what you want from your system, the first step is to you have to collect the requirement. What do you want from your application? Okay, so this is our first step. Now from that step, we're going to actually go into two paths. One for database, which is backend, which will work at backend, and one for application. All right, so application is going to be used by the user. So this is for the front end that the user will use, and the database will stay at the back end. Okay, so for the database we need the data requirement. Okay, so based on the requirement collection analysis and data requirement, using both of them, we are going to, a database designer can create a conceptual design. So one of the form of conceptual design in database is ER diagram. So ER diagram stands for entity relationship diagram. Okay, so from that conceptual schema, it works in a very high level data model. So it will just in a high level, it will give you an idea about the list of entities and how they should interact with each other. Okay, now using that conceptual schema, the database designer can actually come up with a logical design. A logical design is something that we see in our relational model. Okay, so in our relational model, which we covered in chapter 3. Okay, now you can see that actually we are actually taking few steps back. Okay, so we are familiar with chapter 3 and we know that if we have a relational schema, how we can use them by writing some SQL. Okay, but how did we get a relational schema? We are going to now look at that. Okay, all right, then from that relational schema we can do the physical design. Physical design means actually how really we are going to implement that. Okay, now if we think about the application is something like the user is going to use. All right, so for each application we need some functional requirement, so that means we have to do some functional analysis. Then we are going to do some high level transaction specification. All right, so then we are going to do the application program design, and then we are going to implement some transaction. So you can see that until this step, this is DBMS independent. Okay, so it doesn't matter which software you are using. The conceptual design, the requirement collection analysis and functional analysis, they are completely, the DBMS means the database software independent. Okay, so it doesn't matter in which software you are actually using, the conceptual schema doesn't depend on your DBMS software. But when you are going to implement your relational model, okay, that depends on which database software you are going to use, because that means the physical design means you are really now implementing your database design, means you are physically creating the tables, you are physically implementing the constraint, and you are physically, you can implement the SQL on that relational model. Okay, the requirement analysis and the specification in this realm, system analysis and design. So in this chapter we are going to assume that it's already completed. How you can find, how you will know that what should be your requirement in your system, we are going to assume that you already know that. Okay, so we are not going to go over how to collect the data, how to analyze the requirement. Okay, now we will assume that you already have a software specification, you already have a database and software specification. Okay, means you already know that what you want in your database or what you want in your application. All right, so this chapter and the next chapter will focus on the conceptual design. The conceptual design means we have already the requirement analysis. Okay. All right. From that requirement analysis, we can design a conceptual schema. So the conceptual schema is a high level design of a database. As we said, this is DBMS independent. Okay. So this is DBMS independent, and one form we're going to actually talk about in this chapter, ER diagram. So from the term you can see that it's a diagram, means we're going to use some symbolic notation to generate this conceptual schema. Okay, and this is DBMS independent. Then how to do the physical design, it will be discussed in actually chapter 20. All right, but the logical design we're going to talk about in chapter 9. So the logical design is the relational schema that we have used in our example as a chapter 3, 4 and 5. Means the relational schema that we have employee, that department, project, like that. Okay, so this is our relational schema, and this step will be talk about how to map the ER diagram to this relational schema that we are going to talk about in chapter 9. So as we said that ER model is a conceptual data model. So it has some specific notation known as ER diagram, and it is a collection of some specific symbolic notation. Okay, and symbolic notation by which we can draw the ER diagram. So there are a couple of many variation, and there are also a couple of extension. Okay, so the general format known as ER model, but there are some extension like some advanced feature which is known as EER model, and we are going to also talk about that in our next chapter. So the next slide is the ER model. This is an example of ER model of our company database. So we are familiar with the relational schema of company database, but this is the more conceptual model. This is the more high level model of the company database. Okay, now we are going to actually, in this chapter we are going to talk about step-by-step process, how did we generate this conceptual model of this company database. Okay,